A big injury update from Missouri football, but maybe not as big as it might seem on the surface. Let's talk about it right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, got to talk about Caleb Grill's big night on the basketball court last night that, well, may have saved Missouri. That game was a little bit too close for comfort, probably concerningly so, I would say. But you know what? I want to start this program by telling you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I will have some more early thoughts on Missouri against South Carolina coming up later in the program. But I want to start with some big breaking news here, something that is, of course, relevant to the South Carolina game. Unfortunately, it looks like Missouri center Connor Tollison is out for the season, and that's not exactly shocking news when you saw Tollison in crutches on the Missouri sideline in the fourth quarter. This is according to Pete Thamel, by the way. He reports the Tollison is out for the rest of the season with a knee injury, which he suffered on Saturday against Oklahoma. He's one of the country's top centers, and he started 34 games for Missouri and is considered an NFL draft prospect. But you know what? Despite that rather dire picture being painted there by Pete Thamel, I'm actually thinking that Missouri's going to be okay this weekend at center because, frankly, they were okay with Drake Heismeyer in the fourth quarter this past weekend against Oklahoma. And, yeah, the Missouri offense perked up, by the way, in the second half and didn't really seem to miss a beat with Drake Heismeyer in there at center. And as I had said in a previous episode, being a center, coming off cold, off the bench, that's a really tough spot for any player to come into, but especially I think for quarterbacks and centers who have so much responsibility beyond their own individual matchups, setting the protections, making the calls, and all that good stuff. And then, of course, having to snap the football as well. No easy task coming in cold, especially without a lot of reps in practice. Again, similar to quarterback, well, the quarterbacks are going to take the lion's share of those first team reps by far and away. Same thing holds with your offensive linemen as well. But again, I think Drake Heismeyer played very, very well this past weekend. Obviously, Tollison is a starter for a reason. I'm not saying it's a wash. I'm not saying this is a good thing for Missouri by any stretch of the imagination. I just have some pretty good confidence in Drake Heismeyer after this past weekend, and it sure seemed like Eli Drinkwitz did as well. He singled him out for praise after the game. And, you know, running off that theme just a little bit, taking a little bit more of a deep dive into what Eli Drinkwitz said about Bob Stoops after the game, saying, well, sorry, Bob, you don't get to kick our butts anymore. It's not just a guarantee, that type of thing. And now on to the questions. That was Eli Drinkwitz post-game, clearly feeling himself after a big victory as usual. Well, this morning on the SEC network, Drinkwitz clarified a little bit, saying that, hey, you know, this was no shot or anything personal at Bob Stoops. Basically, he's just trying to let everybody in the country know that it's a new Mizzou. There's no more just coming into Faurot Field and pushing us around. And certainly the last couple seasons have made that quite clear. Drinkwitz also said quite plainly that he's a big believer in positive, contagious injury, and he thinks that his team needs to have a very rare and what he called an uncommon belief and faith in each other. So he really is trying to create a culture, and not trying to, he has created a culture. You know, for all the talk of in football of, hey, a lot of these close game results, some of it can be a little bit random and can sort of even out over time, well, don't tell that to anybody in the Missouri locker room, because they think what's happened in these close games over the last couple years is a result of their uncommon belief and faith in each other. And on some level, they're definitely right, because as I've said in a previous episode and in many previous episodes, Eli Drinkwitz has created a locker room and a culture where these teams never give up, even when things are going really poorly. Like, for example, this season against Alabama and against Texas A&M, I never felt like it was because of a lack of effort from the Tigers. And as long as, no matter what happens, you're putting forth your best effort for the man standing next to you on the team and in that locker room, well, good things are bound to happen. You're going to create your own luck at a certain point. So there is something to that. And like I said, Drinkwitz, for all of his talk that may or may not, you can argue with, may or may not be true, that type of deal, hey, if the people in the locker room believe it's true, then that's all that really matters. Now, when it comes to Missouri, South Carolina this weekend, I'm expecting another low-scoring type of game, similar to the Missouri-Oklahoma game last week, well, at least until the last wild few minutes of that game, where suddenly a game of NFL blitz broke out in terms of the craziness that happened there. But I would expect a much more pedestrian type of game, though when the Missouri Tigers are involved, you never know, right? But it seems like my buddies over at FanDuel Sportsbook agree with me right now. A total of 44.5 in the ball game. Not a lot of value there. I would still lean toward the under there for sure, but let's not go crazy on a 44.5. It seems like FanDuel is on to us there for sure. And if Missouri is going to generate some offense, as it did better, certainly with Drew Pine at quarterback in the second half, I think play action passing is going to be really important this week. They need to do it a lot. The Tigers need to run a lot of play action passes, in my opinion. And of course, they need to execute it well. And against that South Carolina front, a very legitimate front seven there, do the Gamecocks have? I think it's even more important to use that element just to slow down that pass rush. And obviously, running the football effectively is going to be critically important, as Gary Pinkel loves to say as well. And on the other side of the ball, well, one of my listeners thinks, John Berger, one of my everydayers, thinks that the key to winning is containing South Carolina quarterback LaNorris Sellers. And John gave out some stats there that I had to clean up just a little bit. Thank you very much. That's why I'm the good editor and journalism grad and Mizzou mafioso that I am. But to John's point here, during the first 7 games for South Carolina, the Gamecocks gave up 29 sacks, about 4, 5, or 6 in every single ball game. But in the last 2, in their previous 2 games against Vanderbilt and Texas A&M, well, the Gamecocks gave up 0. And those were big blowout victories in both of those cases. So perhaps the offensive line has improved for South Carolina, or has it? Or is this more just circumstances? It's difficult for me to say. It's hard to believe that after the last 2 games that suddenly, well, LaNorris Sellers, number one, is a different quarterback that's getting the ball out of his hands more quickly. Or is it maybe just that South Carolina was running the ball more effectively? Because that was certainly the case in their previous game against Vanderbilt. Containing not only Rocket Raheem Sanders, you may remember him, the former Arkansas Razorback. He'll be the running back, the main running back for South Carolina this weekend for sure. He's a really, really dangerous player, but so is LaNorris Sellers as a runner too. Now, if Missouri is able to relatively contain that running game as they have most of the season against most of their opponents, then I think South Carolina could be in for a challenge offensively, because Sellers, you get him into 3rd and medium, 3rd and long. Well, like a lot of guys who are especially run-first type of players, he's just a different player and far less dangerous. So that's going to be a real key for Missouri, all those things I just laid out for you. And with 33 points and 9 rebounds last night, Obviously, Caleb Grill had one of the, if not the career game of his entire career in college basketball. But it wasn't just the production, it was how he got there that made me even more impressed and bullish on Grill for the rest of the season. So let's talk about that here in just a second. But first, it is time for my Roy Player of the Week. And you need to download the Roy app, by the way. You have heard me talk about Roy this season and how they are revolutionizing the NIL industry. Well, Roy allows you, the fan, to have a say in who gets the NIL money. And here's what I absolutely love about Roy. You get your money back if that player transfers. How about that? Roy is helping us keep our team intact, and it's actually good for the game long term. You can show your support for my Roy Player of the Week, by the way. That's Tristan Newson, by depositing a little appreciation into that player's account. To do that, download the Roy app, and you can see what the logo looks like if you're watching on YouTube, or go to joinroy.com. Now let's spotlight the Roy Player of the Week. Again, it's Tristan Newson. We're going to throw some money his way into his Roy account for making the key fumble breakup, the forced fumble that allowed Zion Young to run it into the end zone for the Missouri victory. Every contribution counts. $10, $20, it all adds up, and it's going to help your favorite players stay put. Join me and show some love for Tristan Newson. Download the Roy app or go to joinroy.com today. Use promo code LOCKEDON. Every athlete from every team is there. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for full terms. Roy, support the players, change the game. So the high in three-pointers last season by any Missouri Tiger was 4. And Caleb Grill had 4 3-pointers made in the first half, ended up with another 4 for 8 total, 8 out of 10, 10 out of 13 total for Caleb Grill. Obviously a hot shooting night and a great rebounding night as well. 4 offensive rebounds, 5 defensive rebounds, a very near double-double for Caleb as well. And it wasn't just that he was highly productive. To me, it was how he did it. And one thing I noticed, by the way, before the game even started, I thought, Honor Boateng, the true freshman guard from Arkansas, him starting, to me, seemed like as much to take pressure off of Grill as anything else. Well, it may have been also a message if you take Dennis Gates, who said, I benched him. He was mad at me, and he responded. It's just that simple. Well, obviously an impressive game from Grill, but like I said, it wasn't just what he did, it was how he did it. I think Dennis Gates is an assist turnover guy. He doesn't want his guards in particular giving the ball away. Well, Grill had done far too much of that in the first 2 games, trying passes that, in my opinion, were just far too high of a level of difficulty. Well, in this game, Grill simply caught the ball and made a quick decision to either fire the ball up in the air or pass it back to a teammate in rather conservative fashion. So to me, Grill just totally played within himself, and yet what was within him last night was a cauldron of fire that was bursting forth from his loins, essentially. I mean, he was incredible last night. An amazing game from Caleb Grill. Great to see it, because the first 2 games, I was a little critical of Caleb, constructive criticism, I would say. Well, nothing to criticize last night, because he was just about perfect, other than a couple missed free throws or so. But, Missouri, once again, speaking of those free throws, by the way, Missouri gets to the line 31 times, makes 22 of them for 71%. That's a good sign, because if Missouri is going to hit its ceiling, it's got to get to the free throw line a lot, because I just don't know that the shooting, other than Caleb Grill last night, of course, and the fiery cauldron from within, I just don't know that we can consistently count on great three-point shooting from this Missouri team this season. Now, it was a nice start for Missouri, who was leading Eastern Washington by 12 at the half, 45-33. Then the Tigers lost the second half by 5, making, of course, some uncomfortable moments there down the stretch for Missouri fans. And I'm definitely disappointed the Tigers didn't put the Eastern Washington Eagles away, but it just didn't, in the moment, for whatever reason, it didn't feel as bad as the score was to me. So take that for what it's worth. Perhaps my expectations as a Missouri basketball fan after last season have been lowered to that point. Maybe that is it. I will say this, too. I was making some jokes that Andrew Cook for Eastern Washington, I was going, hey, this guy is kind of cooking for Missouri right now in the transfer portal era. Are we allowed to give him an NIL offer and a jersey at halftime? Can he just come over to our side right now? Hey, buddy, you're a Missouri Tiger. Welcome. Well, the concerning thing about that is you look up Cook a little bit more. He's had a nice start to his senior season here, but then you realize, oh, wait, this guy never played Division I basketball before this year. He played at Carroll College before coming to Eastern Washington. So the Missouri defense, once again, not exactly scaring a lot of drivers right now, including the 6'4", rather below the rim player in Andrew Cook. No offense to him, he looked like a nice player. He played very well last night. My point is, it's just concerning that a player of that level, well, kind of cooked Missouri's perimeter defense a little bit. And one of the problems is there when Missouri does not have Josh Gray in the ball game, or Aiden Shaw for that matter. Shaw played 12 minutes. Gray, who started, played only 11 minutes. When either one of those guys is not in the ball game, there's just not much of a paint in terms of paint or rim protection. There's no deterrence for drivers coming into the lane whatsoever. That's a real problem for the Missouri defense. And more to that point, I just think the lack of shooting on this roster is probably going to come back to bite them eventually, because the best 5 offensive guys, the best 5 offensive players you could put together, in my opinion, on this roster, and the best 5 defensive guys you could put together on this roster really don't overlap very well, in my opinion. That's why I think actually Trent Pierce is kind of an important player, because at 6'10" and a guy who does have a decent shot, he is kind of, in theory, a guy who can play 2 ways, at least get away with it. I'm not saying he has to be your best defender or anything, but just at that size alone, and the length and athleticism he has, he should be able to at least bother an offense, in theory, and he should be able to grab a rebound. He was a decent rebounder last season, a horrible shooter statistically, but a decent defensive rebounder. So that's why it's odd to me that Trent Pierce didn't play at all last night. To me, he is one of those rare, on this roster at least, a 2-way player who can make a shot and be a plus on the defensive end as well. There isn't enough of that right now. You look at guys like Marcus Allen, the true freshman, played 14 minutes last night, does some really good things, a good hustle player, good athlete, good size for a small forward, that type of deal. He didn't attempt a 3-pointer, was 1 of 4 from the floor. I just don't see him as a shooter yet. It just doesn't seem like that's happening. And for whatever reason, by the way, Marquez Warwick, who came into this season as college basketball's leading scorer, got just 2 minutes in the ball game last night. For whatever reason, Dennis Gates doesn't want to play him. Jacob Cruz finally got some action last night, 13 minutes, made his lone shot, a 3-pointer in the second half. And again, back to my point of, hey, your best offense and your best defense doesn't necessarily mesh. Anthony Robinson right now is a menace defensively, but offensively, 0 for 3 from the floor last night. You love the 8 of 10 from the free throw line. Love that aggression, taking the ball and going into contact from Robinson. But right now, if he's not getting to the free throw line, I just don't know that you can trust him to score or knock down a jump shot either. So these are some real challenges for Missouri basketball. And of course, the Tigers have a real challenge on the football field ahead of them this week with South Carolina. And you know what? One South Carolina listener of this program says that he actually thinks the point spread is way too high. Let's talk about a little more about that football game coming up in just a second. But speaking of the point spread, hey, it's FanDuel time, and get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And a welcome to all you South Carolina Gamecocks fans who may be listening and watching to the program, including listener Todd, who says, as a Gamecock fan, I think the point spread is way too high. Well, it is coming down a little bit, Todd, from 13.5, now down to 12.5 over at FanDuel Sportsbook. I certainly think the Gamecocks deserve to be a significant favorite here. I think a touchdown at least would be appropriate. 7+ points, I would totally agree with that. I just think once we're getting into 2 touchdowns into that range, it seems like a little bit of an overreaction to me because, well, the Missouri Tigers have a legitimately good defense, number one, especially when you consider that the Missouri's biggest weakness has been giving up explosive plays in the passing game. I wouldn't say that at first glance that is South Carolina's strength. I'm sure they've hit some explosive passing plays this season. I'm just saying, is that what I'm worried about when facing South Carolina? No, it's more their formidable run game. And, of course, that front seven and that really formidable pass rush that they have defensively. So this really isn't the worst matchup in the world for Missouri. While certainly South Carolina is trending up, they deserve to be the favorite. I agree. I just think, 12.5, 13.5, good to see the Todd out there, despite being a Gamecock, does indeed agree with me. And I mentioned how quarterback LaNorris Sellers has to avoid sacks, to be sure, as the Gamecocks have done the past couple weeks, but he also has to avoid turnovers, and that's something that also Sellers has done a good job of the last couple games. But there is reason to believe that Missouri, again, with its strong defense, could change that, to be sure. And you know what? Getting back to a topic from earlier this week, of course, the ending of the Oklahoma game, just total pandemonium at Faurot Field. About as loud as anything I've experienced there. I think still the loudest moment, in my opinion. And there are very few games I've missed at home over the last 25 or 30 years or so. But to me, the loudest one, still John McAfee against Oklahoma, the opening kickoff return. That's as loud as I've ever heard it at Faurot Field. But some good moments that I had forgotten about, well, at least off the top of my head. Number one, hey, John Berger brought him up earlier in the show. Let's bring him up again. Beating Texas in 1997, rushing the field and carrying off the goalpost. Best Mizzou football moment for me. That was insane. Good call there. Ricky Williams, I believe that was his Heisman Trophy year off the top of my head, if memory serves. Also, of course, well, the Mo miracle, that game, the long touchdown pass from Blaine Gabbert to TJ Moe, mostly yards after catch on that one. Just a crazed ending there. I also think of it as the Jarrell Jackson block game, too, as Jackson, API's Jarrell Jackson, by the way, takes out 2 Aztec defenders with a block and really springs that play open for TJ Moe to be the hero there. So a great memory from that era as well. Another 2010 play too, right? That was the same season as the John McAfee moment. So some wild moments there in 2010, no question about that. And by the way, just a little bit of an interesting note to go out on. You may have noticed that John Stockton's son, Sam Stockton, got into the game last night for Eastern Washington. I got to say, Gonzaga, this is a bad look for you. And here's what I mean. Because Missouri, we put Desiree Reed-Francois' kid on the roster last season. We put Michael Porter Jr.'s dad on the bench and gave him like a $500,000 a year job. But Gonzaga can't find a walk-on spot for John freaking Stockton's kid? What are we even doing here? I'm finna pass on this body, Gonzaga. Well, with that being said, hope you've enjoyed this edition of Locked On Mizzou. I know I have. As you can tell, I'm feeling a little bit slap happy today. But regardless, I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to more recordings today, including later, I'm going to record Locked On SEC and the Locked On SEC Squad show this week. Check it out on Thursday afternoon for your drive time entertainment. So until next time, I'll be back with you on Wednesday for another edition of Locked On Mizzou. And until then, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.